Good afternoon. Today is January 21st, and this is the first bill hearings of the 2025 session for the Ways and Means Committee. And Director Demarinis will appreciate this, and the Vice Chair said on the best topic. So because it's our first hearing, I've been asked to read some rules, so let's get through these rules. Patience and grace, please. We have all new AV equipment, and it's a hybrid system. We may have issues that occur. Virtual witnesses, which we do not have today, but virtual witnesses may encounter technical problems, so we'll have to work through that. Time limits are 2 minutes per witness. Sponsors are not timed. However, I reserve the right to time you. The timer will show up on the screen. In-person witnesses will be called first for all positions, then all virtual witnesses for all positions. We do not allow PowerPoint presentations or any presentations. If you want the committee members to have one, then you can upload it through the MyMGA during the sign-up period, the same way as written testimony, or you can email it directly to committee members. Lastly, a reminder that all testimony sign up is through MyMGA on the MGA website 48 hours before a hearing, excuse me, 8 a.m. to 6 p.m., not including weekends. See specific sign up, written testimony details, and hearing rules on the Ways and Means page of the MGA website. And I will probably read that the first couple of hearings and then no longer. And with that, we will go ahead and begin. House Bill 160, Delegate Cardin.
Chair, members of the committee, it's a pleasure and an honor to be the first person here testifying before you on House Bill 160. You have my testimony before you. It was eloquently written by my aide, Matt Horn, behind me, so if there's any typos, you can blame him. This is Bill... Buck stops with me. Already thrown him under the bus. This is a bill that you have heard many times before. I have tried to correct a quirk in the law that came when we changed the Constitution of the state of Maryland to allow MGM to build a casino in National Harbor. And in doing that, there was a delegate from Montgomery County a beloved delegate who I had tremendous respect for. His name was Louis Simmons, who got a amendment in. It passed, it failed 3 times, 66, 66, and then finally it passed 67, 65, to prohibit casino license holders from being able to make political contributions. Now that we have other types of gaming that you all are aware of, such as sports books and maybe online and all kinds of other things that don't have that prohibition, it is really an anomalous and a malfunction in the law to have inconsistencies between license holders that do the exact same thing but are treated differently by the law. This inconsistency really does reflect poorly, and it makes the campaign finance world of the election board have difficulty in determining who is prohibited and who is not. They are here for questions if you have any for them, and I will submit on that.
Okay, thank you. Are there any questions for Delegate Cardin? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you.
House Bill 287, Delegate Harris.
Well, great afternoon, Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair, and also members of the Ways and Means Committee. My name is Delegate Kevin M. Harris. I represent Legislative District 27A, which consists of Charles County and Prince George's. Thank you for the opportunity to present House Bill 287. This bill ensures that individuals cannot run for more than one office at the same time, or serve in a public office while holding another elected position in political parties, such as the Central Committee. The bill is set to take effect October 1st, 2025, providing ample time for Central Committee candidates and political parties to adapt to these changes. The need for House Bill 287 is echoed in several states with similar dual office holding and dual candidacy restrictions. According to the National Conference of State Legislators, such laws ensures public officials and party leaders remain fully dedicated to their roles and avoid overlapping interests. For example, Texas prohibits individuals from running for or holding two different offices simultaneously. New Jersey restricts dual office holding, prohibiting holding two elected office simultaneously as well. Additionally, Georgia prohibits candidates from running for more than one position at the same time. By prohibiting dual roles, House Bill 287 promotes accountability, ensuring that public officials can devote their attentions fully to their responsibilities. Furthermore, this bill fosters inclusiveness by creating opportunities for broader participation in both political and government systems, allowing for a wide range of leadership and representations. This legislation is a critical step in protecting the integrity of Maryland political institutions and restoring public trust. I respectfully urge a favorable report on House Bill 287, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you for your time and your consideration, and I will add that there is no fiscal note.
Thank you. Any questions for Delegate Harris? Okay, seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you.
That concludes the hearing on House Bill 287, House Bill 41, and Jared Demarinis, come on up.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I promise my testimony will be a lot shorter than my briefings the last time. House Bill 41, Jared Demarinis, State Administrator of Elections for the record. House Bill 41 does two things. It clarifies changes the deadline to submit a new party petition to the first Monday in July. And then it also basically says that once you've submitted a petition, you cannot reuse those signatures for a subsequent petition effort later on, making sure that all the signatures in every petition effort are fresh and valid at that point there. The reason why we wanted to move it up the month is because the first Monday in August, there's a lot of petition submissions at that time, candidate petitions, charter petitions. It does overwhelm the local boards because they have to verify and certify these petition efforts within 20 days. So this basically will alleviate some of the administrative burdens on this. We have talked to some of the non-principal political parties already, their representatives, the Green and Libertarian parties, and neither one of them had any issues with this moving it up the 1 month. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay, are there any questions for Mr. Demarinis? Okay, seeing none, thank you, Mr. Demarinis. We have two unfavorables, Alan Lang and Philip Benetti. If you could please come forward. If you are here. Alan Lang and Philip Benetti. Okay, then that concludes the hearing on House Bill 41, House Bill 199. Mr. Demarinis.
Thank you. This is the second departmental bill that we have today. Jared Demarinis, State Administrator of Elections. House Bill 199 just basically clarifies the time period when we send out a written notice to a voter who is on a permanent mail-in ballot list. Currently, the law is kind of ambiguous with its 75 days before when the locals do it. This basically clarifies it, says 120 days, between 120 days and 90 days, the state board before a primary election will send out a notice to the person on the permanent mail-in ballot list, reminding them that they are on that permanent mail-in ballot list, and if they so wish to remove themselves from that list, now is the time, or if they want to change their status or update any of their mailing addresses where we're going to send the mail at that point. This is also has the support of the local boards of elections, Mayo, and the other change too is allows more methods to contact voters if that written notice was returned back to us, meaning that if we have a telephone number, we would contact them by telephone, as you know, in that time period as well. Simple bill, and it received the bipartisan support from the State Board of Elections. With that, I submit it for approval.
Okay, any questions? Okay, seeing none, thank you. That concludes the hearing on House Bill 199. House Bill 274, Mr. Demarinis.
Yes, again, Jared Demarinis, State Administrator of Elections, for the record here. House Bill 274 does a couple of things here. right now, we've had a bunch of election plans. We have an early voting plan, we have a drop box plan, and we have a polling place plan. This will basically combine those plans for administrative convenience that the local boards would submit to the state board. Instead of submitting 3 separate plans, they will submit 1 election plan with the same sort of requirements for each of those plans. And we have moved the deadline up from 6 months ahead of primary election to 7 months, meaning that then if the state board during their review process receives, say, I would say, input from stakeholders or wants to reject or make alterations to the plan, that the local boards then have enough time to make those alterations without really impacting the election administration or processes later on. So that extra month is key for us there. Basically, it also changes the benchmark for polling place, precinct polling place locations to a redistricting rather than a specific year. Basically, you know, if we tie everything to 2018, as we keep moving further away from 2018, populations have shifted. We'll have redistricting in 2030. So it's best to tie it to the first year of a redistricting rather than something that was pre-COVID. And then finally, in the early voting plan, there's a list of factors there. Notably, one of the factors that the local board is supposed to review and look at is geographic locations. This basically clarifies that the geographic distribution of early voting centers should be tied to a specific, when the county has a specific number of centers, 4 or more, rather than being under that number, because at that point there, we would want to make sure that the population is served rather than just geographic locations. So this kind of clarifies that, because when you have 4, then you can kind of space them around and take that into consideration. But with that, I submit this for approval. Thank you.
Questions, Delegate Patterson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you for the proposed modifications to this bill. It really addressed some of the concerns I had last week when you had the overview. But my question still has to do with how do local boards secure input or information from the public, especially early voting. Do they require approval? Do they have typically, do they have a hearing or open for suggestions for sites? It was a problem in my county when there was a site and the site did not comply with what we felt were the requirements.
So I think that this kind of helps address that by moving it up an extra month, so that if the stakeholders in the specific county miss that meeting, because the local boards go out, the election directors find the locations for the early voting sites, okay, and then they also find the polling place sites. The local board has to then approve those locations in an open meeting. At that point there, at that meeting, which has to comply with the Open Meetings Act, they have to then notify certain, I would have to say that they would have to put out notice to the public. Mm-hmm. If then the public misses that meeting and still has questions or concerns about the locations, by having this, they can always follow the State Board of Elections and then have those addressed at our level, okay, at which point then we would be able then to send it back to the local boards for remediation. And I think by having this extra month, right, we publicize our deadlines a lot more and people follow us. So there will be, I would say, greater chance for input from stakeholders.
Well, thank you very much. I will share that information.
Any further questions? Okay, thank you. That concludes the hearing on House Bill 199. And your final bill, I believe, House Bill 274, Mr. Demarais.
That was 274.
Oh, that was 274.
I think I did them all.
You did it, you did.
Yeah, right,
okay,
all 3, we're done.
It
was fast, so thank you.
I'm gonna go out of order. I see Director Phillips here. We will do House Bill 101.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the committee. My name is Dan Phillips. I'm the Director of the Department of Assessments and Taxation. House Bill 101 alters the deadline for local taxing authorities to set their property tax rates from July 1 to June 1st. The deadline for local governments to set and submit their property tax rates to the department, currently being July 1 of each year, is the same date that most counties are required to issue tax bills. The department requires all local property tax rates in order to calculate the amount of homeowners' tax credits an applicant should receive from the county. Year after year, these credits are calculated and issued late, usually in revised tax bills, because the department has a short window of time in which to calculate and report credits to county finance offices. By altering the date to give the department homeowners tax credit division more time, this bill would cut significantly into the number of revised tax bills issued by local governments and the number of service calls fielded by SDAT and local offices for later missing credits. The department is in ongoing conversations with some local jurisdictions and is open to amendments later in June to accommodate local budget deadlines. Thank you. I respectfully request a favorable review for this bill.
Okay, are there any questions? Okay, seeing none, thank you. We do have Mr. Canali here, who is favorable with amendment. Come on up. Welcome back to Ways and Means.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. It's nice to be back, and members of the committee. Kevin Canali here in support of the bill with amendments. First, I'll say I appreciate SDAT's willingness to work with MACo and other stakeholders to address some concerns. We certainly understand the bill, and we want to make sure that we're getting accurate information, and giving SDAT time to calculate that information is important. We do want to ask for an amendment just to move this up to June 20th. We feel like that will give SDAT additional time to calculate these credits and make sure they have the good information, but also it alleviates pressures at the local level, changing charters, other governing documents, and gives people, citizens, residents, enough time to come in and provide input, and then for counties to actually handle late-breaking developments, budget analysis, et cetera. So we feel like this is enough time. We feel like it's a happy medium. We want to work with SDAT and make sure we have this data and it's correct, but we feel like June 20th would give all counties across the state enough time to comply, and therefore we'd ask for a favorable report with amendments to move that up to June 20th, please.
Any questions? Delegate Palakovich-Carr.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. Canali, for the alternative suggestion. I feel like I have to wear my former local elected official hat for a moment. Do you have data on, for say the most recent year, what dates all of the counties submitted it by? Like, would your guess be at this point most are already submitting by June 20th, and maybe this is just would be impacting a handful of jurisdictions?
I believe so. That's my understanding. I think SDAT may be the better entity to answer that question, but my understanding from our county finance folks is that June 20th, typically everything is submitted by that point.
And we did have everybody had submitted by the June 20th date this past year.
Any further questions? Okay, seeing none, thank you very much. That concludes the hearing on House Bill 101. House Bill 133, Director Phillips.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the committee. For the record, my name is Dan Phillips. I'm the Director of the Department of Assessments and Taxation. I'm here to testify in support of House Bill 133. House Bill 133 would repeal the requirement that SDAT calculate and notify each taxing authority of the constant yield tax rate. Currently, the department is required to calculate for each taxing authority, 23 counties, Baltimore City, and each municipality, the constant yield tax rate. This is a rate which allows counties to collect the same amount of revenue despite fluctuations as they collected the prior year, despite fluctuations in the property's underlying assessed value. Currently, the constant yield is not used by the vast majority of local taxing authorities. Furthermore, as counties seek to impose tax rates on different classes of property that are not tracked by the department's number will become increasingly unreliable. The department has advised counties that it will continue to calculate the rate upon request. In its current form, however, the statute presents an undue burden on existing agency operations. The balance of the law that was required local jurisdictions to utilize the constant yield tax rate was removed in a prior legislative session. The department respectfully requests a favorable report on House Bill 133. Thank you, and I'll glad to answer any questions.
Okay, Delegate Hartman?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for being here today. And our office has reached out with an email. I represent Worcester and Wycomico. Wycomico has concern with this. They need the information. And I think they had discussions with you as well, and you said you would provide it at request. We would like to see language in the bill, because working with your administration, they have the trust that that would happen. You're giving them the word, but with future administrations, there's no guarantee of that. So they would just like to see language that would suggest that if a county would request it, that it would be provided.
I mean, we certainly would be open to an amendment that would keep this section of law, but put in if requested by a certain date, say if requested by, say, February 1st. Because normally this year we're sending out the constant yield information to every jurisdiction on February 13th. If they request it by the 1st of February, as an example, we would do that, but not have to send it out. You know, we're sending out certificates to every jurisdiction, whether they use it or not, but we could certainly be open to amending it to as requested.
Sure, I'll follow up with the with Wycomico and offer the date of February 1st, is what you're suggesting?
Yes, that's what I'm suggesting.
And then follow up with you, but I appreciate the willingness then for a friendly amendment if that works. Thank you.
Certainly.
Delegate Buckle?
Madam Chair, and thank you, Director. I guess I have sort of a philosophical objection, because the constant yield tax rate is supposed to be something so that taxpayers can look and say, hey, the property taxes are effectively being raised because my assessment keeps going up, and you testified in front of us last week, and we all know that assessments seem to be going up everywhere, all the time, constantly. Never goes down, always goes up, from Oakland to Ocean City and every point in between. And so I thought that the purpose of the law and the constant yield tax rate is so that taxpayers, not an overburdened analyst, not a local government official who likes to get around it, but that a taxpayer could sit there and say, hey, you as the local government, whatever that body may be, has the power to adjust my tax rate mathematically so that my property taxes don't go up. The State Department of Assessments and Taxation has come in and said my property that 3 years ago was $300,000 is now $400,000, and I got to pay more taxes for that. And you know, I can accept that if the county doesn't have the ability to do it. But if you don't calculate the constant yield tax rate, and it's not published anywhere, and no one finds out about it, why don't we just get rid of it? Why don't we just say, hey, you just pay more taxes every year. There's no way to adjust it. It just is what it is. And is there really a big burden for your department to just give this number and then you're done? You gave the number, you gave the assessment. It's up to the locals to decide what to do with that.
Like I said, we are willing to give that information to the local governments. The requirement that the constant yield tax rate be posted on tax bills was removed a couple years ago. So that's no longer in effect. Essentially, the public is not being notified of that at this point. It's simply we're sending this to local government because the requirement of that was changed. At the time the legislature imposed a notice to state on our bills, on our notices that any increase in the assessment rate may raise someone's taxes, but it did not. It removed any notice to requirement to notify the public of what that constant yield tax rate. That was removed a couple years ago at the legislature.
So now if I was a taxpayer and I said, hey, I want to come to the Allegheny County Commission meeting in downtown Cumberland and say, man, my tax bill jumped up substantially, and I've seen it. So what the county government will do is they'll point the finger at you. That's SSTAT's problem. They raised your assessment. Go fight with SSTAT. And the taxpayer says, well, that might be one angle, but I might not be able to go fight with SSTAT. Don't you control what you actually set the rate for the taxes? And the local official may say, yeah, I do, but we just maintain it the same. I guess what I'm getting at is there's no transparency at all. If you don't even provide it to the local government person is going to shrug their shoulders and go, we get that information from SSTAT, and they don't provide us with that anymore. So now it's all going to be on you. Now all the thunder comes to you of like, well, the local, and that's not fair to you because the local governments do have a tool where they could adjust the practical impact of those assessment raises by changing the rate to the constant yield or someone close to the constant yield. But no one's going to know about it. We don't publish it to the taxpayer directly anymore, and now you're not going to give it to the localities anymore. And so everybody's going to shake their head and go, I don't know, guess your taxes are just going up. Do you think that'll probably be the practical effect of all of this?
That very well may be.
Okay.
Exactly. I don't know how many times people have asked about what the constant yield tax rate is.
It's very complicated.
In the last 2 years. You know, as far as from the general public and with the local government that when they're setting tax rates.
Okay. I appreciate your candor. Thank you very much.
Delegate Hornberger.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I should know this, but maybe best for the rest of the committee. Have we removed the requirement in the newspaper that the counties must publish that says we're going above constant yield, staying in constant yield, et cetera? Is that still in place?
That was removed with the legislation from prior session.
Right. So at this point, currently, there's no notification whatsoever to individual taxpayers as the constant yield rate?
No, that was removed.
Okay, and there's no requirement for the counties to share this with taxpayers in any form, or be print media, internet, online as well?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay. So if someone, the only recourse at this point, if I'm thinking, from a mathematical standpoint, is for someone to reverse engineer their tax bill and their tax assessment to figure out that rate. Is that accurate?
They would actually have to know the assessable base for the entire county and what it was the prior year before. They couldn't do it from their individual tax bill.
All right, so what we've just laid out here is that from a transparency standpoint, as my colleague just pointed out, there will be no way for an individual ratepayer to determine what that rate is if this bill were to pass.
Are we talking about in a county that did not request or use the constant
Correct.
yield for that year's property tax rate?
Correct.
Okay.
Then probably there would not be a way for them
Okay.
to find that information.
All right, thank you.
Delegate Fair.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Is there a way for an individual to reach out to SSTAT either through their appeals process, which they are granted 3 levels of appeal for their property assessment, that they would be able to identify this information with SSTAT?
If SSTAT is not required to do it, then likely we're not going to continue to do it except for the jurisdictions
Right.
that request it.
Yep.
So we would have to then go back and calculate it for those individual jurisdictions.
And forgive me, can you remind me what, because this was a couple years ago that we had this discussion about constant yield, and I think you commented earlier in your testimony about the challenges with constant yield in the first place. Could you just elaborate on those challenges?
Some of the challenges are really with jurisdictions that have multiple tax rates. Municipalities have had the ability to do different subclasses with different tax rates. When we're doing those, I think we issue one of the jurisdictions 7 certificates for 7 different tax rates that they have for different classes of property, which means we've got to accumulate all the data, do all the calculations, because they have different rates for different, be it commercial, apartments, single-family residential, they have different tax rates. Additionally, the legislation has been passed last year that allowed them to create something called a vacant improved building. So if you have a building that is unoccupied, they can classify that. SSTAT does not track that. So they set special rates for that. We can't take that into consideration when we're doing the constant yield. So the validity of the data in some of those jurisdictions has been diluted because of them setting tax rates for properties that we don't track as far as the class of the property.
So during the appeals process, if an individual decides to appeal their assessment, though, SSTAT would be able to produce information, not necessarily the constant yield, but be able to produce information about how they came to that assessment.
Oh, we can do it on the assessment. The difference is calculating out what the county or jurisdiction tax rate would have been under a constant yield.
Yep. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Yeah. Any further questions? Okay, seeing none, thank you very much, Mr. Director.
Thank you.
That concludes the hearing on House Bill 133. Going back up to House Bill 52, Delegate Vogel.
Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair, colleagues on the Ways and Means Committee, Delegate Joe Vogel here with House Bill 52. I'll keep it very quick. This is a bill that I sponsored last session as well. Wow, not last week. This bill acknowledges that high school students and students generally are the individuals most impacted by the decisions being made by boards of education, and therefore enables counties to enfranchise them with a vote in determining who sits on the Board of Education, recognizing that they should have a say in those elected officials who most directly make decisions that impact their lives and their education every single day. With that, I urge a favorable review, and there are many students and advocates from across the state that submitted written testimony since this bill was sponsor only, and I encourage you to read the testimony as well. Thank you.
So thank you, and we do have a question, but just for folks that are listening to us via Zoom or YouTube or whatever, sponsor-only bills are bills that are reintroductions that the committee has previously heard. Delegate Wu?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Delegate, and bring forward the bill. Again, I don't know whether I asked this question or not last year, but some students come to my office. I shared the concern about the double vote issue because students or vote one student board member, right? Or the from 6th grade to 12th grade. So they have one vote on the school board because they're voting for student board member. Now they're giving extra vote to vote on other board member. Is that a double vote issue?
Well, thank you, Delegate. You can whisper that question next time. I sit right next to you. So.
Okay, yeah, I saw that.
Look, Delegate, I look forward to.
I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. Look, I mean, that is an issue that we can, A, resolve in committee, and B, since it is enabling legislation, the counties would have to determine the policies around that themselves. I think it's a valid question, but I definitely think that this is a step forward in franchising more students across the state.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair.
Delegate Roberts, who does not sit right next to you.
Thank you. I was going to say that. Thank you, Madam Chair. I just forgot a little bit of my question, but I guess what I want to ask is if there, I mean, you know, we've got, sometimes, would this be a law that enables them or requires the LEAs or the boards to make that law? Like, you know, make it so that the student board members can vote?
It is enabling legislation. Well, a constitutional amendment that would enable counties.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I have some concerns, but I'll talk to you offline.
Great.
Mm-hmm. Any further questions? Okay, seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you.
That concludes the hearing on House Bill 52, House Bill 111. Delegate Palakovich-Carr.
Good afternoon, colleagues. For the record, I'm Delegate Julie Palakovich-Carr, here to present House Bill 111. This bill would provide much needed transparency for political exploratory committees. Before I get to what this bill does, I think it's helpful to know a little bit about the current regulatory environment. So in 2022, the State Board of Elections put forth regulations to allow someone to test the waters of a potential run for office without having to declare as a candidate or create a campaign committee. For example, someone might want to see if they could be a viable candidate to run for, say, governor or attorney general. So these existing regulations allow an exploratory committee to raise money to pay for polling, communications with voters, and other activities to help determine whether or not that potential candidate should run or not. And on the whole, I think this is a good thing, but there is some fine-tuning, in my opinion, that needs to be done in regards to these regulations, especially to improve public transparency. So currently, exploratory committees are not required to disclose campaign contributions and expenditures. As we know, all other campaign committees and political entities in our state do have to periodically report on the money that they've raised, who they've raised it from, and how they're spending that money. And I think exploratory committees should be held to that same standard. Second, the current regulations allow only Marylanders who are not currently a candidate to form an exploratory committee. So that means if someone has already filed for, say, re-election to their current seat or has filed as a first-time candidate for another seat, they cannot form an exploratory committee, even if they're thinking about running for another office. And I think there's some scenarios where that could play out. For instance, if there was a late-breaking, suddenly vacancy or open seat for a statewide office, I think there might be a lot of candidates who were planning to run for re-election for a seat, maybe were already running for a seat in the General Assembly or in local office, who might be tempted by that newly open statewide seat. But the current regulations would preclude those folks who've already declared as candidates from opening an exploratory committee to explore running potentially for a different office. So the bill would allow anyone to open an exploratory committee so long as their exploration is for a different office from the one they have currently filed for. And third, the bill adds more flexibility for what's an allowable expenditure by an exploratory committee to be better reflective of real-world needs. And it also provides more options for how remaining funds can be disposed of at the termination of an exploratory committee. And that change specifically would better align with how we treat surplus funds from other campaign finance entities and how they can dispose of their funds. So in sum, this bill would codify the existing core elements of the regulations SBE already has put forward, while providing some additional guardrails. And I'll note that the bill is supported by the Office of the Attorney General, and that the language in this bill has twice passed the Senate. And lastly, for anyone who may remember prior iterations of this bill when it had a different sponsor, this bill does not include draft committees. So with that, thank you for your consideration.
Questions, Delegate Hornberger.
Thank you, Madam Chair. How or if any impact would this have on people running for federal office that don't reside in the state?
It should have no impact because all of our state laws and regulations are specific to state offices and like the county, city of Baltimore offices.
Okay, so it wouldn't impact someone running for president. They would not be allowed to open one of these committees because they don't reside here.
They would fall under the federal election laws and rules, so this has nothing to do with folks who are exploring running for president.
Thank you.
Any further questions? Delegate Buckle.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
And Delegate Blakovich-Carr, you probably do know this, I'm sure. If not, I'm sure Mr. Demarinis does. Is there a requirement in law today that when you open a campaign finance entity that you have to say I'm running for this particular office? Because there's lots of people, it seems to me, I'm not picking on anybody. Mine's named very simple. Buckle for delegate. I assume for delegate. Might be Melissa from Maryland, our state treasurer, who's a wonderful guy. I just read an article in one of our local political rags that said he still maintains a campaign finance account and raised money last year. To the best of my knowledge, he's not actively running for any office or has indicated as such. So I guess my question always has been about this bill is, what's the difference? Why do we need an exploratory committee? If you want to say, hey, I want to raise money for the potentiality of me running for governor, comptroller, county executives, whatever it is, whatever's governed by our state finance laws, campaign finance laws, you can do that today, right? I don't have to say Julie Polakovich-Carr for Montgomery County Executive in order for you to go out and raise as much money as you can in your current existing account. And then you can transfer that to any other statewide office that you choose to run for at a certain point in time. Is that understanding of the law correct?
Madam Chair, would it be all right if Mr. Damaris came up to answer the specific question about when someone opens a campaign account?
Yeah, I thought that might be, yeah. I always rely, because you know so much more about me than pretty much everything else, so I just assumed that you knew that.
Sure. That is correct, right. It attaches to you as a candidate, the contribution limits, not to the particular office. So you can seek county office, you can seek a state office, you can seek a judicial office, anything that is covered under the election law article.
Okay. And there are people out there today who aren't actively seeking to anyone's knowledge, maybe deep in the recesses of their mind, they're not seeking any office. They used to maybe be an office holder. There's a certain time period where they can maintain an account and they can choose to raise money even during that tail period, correct?
Yes, you have 8 years from the last time you either appear on the ballot or was an office holder.
To maintain an entity.
To maintain it, and then after the 8-year period, then we will come in and, force you to close
make you dispose of the money in accordance with the legal obligations. Yes. And then my other question is, and my final one, because I think that may demonstrate why this is or is not necessary. the exploratory committee contribution amounts, they transfer over to whatever you then say you're going to run for?
No, it's a $6,000 cap, so similar for like a
Okay.
candidate.
Right.
With a typical committee can only transfer up to $6,000 to another candidate, it's the same cap.
Okay, so, but if I say it's the Chow Wu for Governor Exploratory Committee, which I'm going to get behind significantly, believe me. If we say that, thank you. Chow Buckle, that'll be a good team right there. So if I contributed $6,000 to that particular exploratory committee, and then 2 months later, 3 months later, a year later, whatever period it is, my good friend decides he's going to go for it, and he converts that into a normal campaign, what I would call a normal, that's probably not a term of art, but a regular campaign finance entity, can I give him another $6,000, or am I already capped because I gave to his exploratory committee?
It's for the cycle, I believe.
Per cycle, right. But if it was within
Yeah.
the same 4-year cycle, his exploratory committee counts for the same thing as when he converts it into a full-blown, yes, I'm running committee.
I'll have to double check the law, but I mean, right now, exploratory committees are outside the scope of the election law article, which is where the regulations come in, and which is why it's not attached to candidates, right? Because it's outside of it, and then you can't convert any monies that are in the exploratory committee for campaign activities. But this one here allows for candidates to explore other offices while maintaining their campaign account.
So that would be my only question then. Will we tighten that up, or is that the way that it's already written? If I wanted to give $6,000 to my friend Delegate Wu because he said, hey, I'm taking some polling activity to think about running for governor, could I give him $6,000 and then also give him $6,000 for his delegate campaign, and then whether he changes his mind or he does it, wouldn't that have the practical effect of I gave him $12,000 to potentially run for governor or run for delegate, run for whatever he decides, rather than I just gave him $6,000 that I would be capped at normally?
I think that's a fair point, and I'd be happy to keep talking with you.
Okay.
I mean, I think I'm open to an amendment on that front to tighten
That
things up.
if you transition to a full-blown, whatever term we want to use at committee, whoever gave to your exploratory committee, their contributions are counted against that cap. Okay, thank you, I appreciate it.
Any further questions? Okay, seeing none, thank you very much. That concludes the hearing on House Bill 111. Delegate Plakovich-Carr, House Bill 237.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And again, for the record, Delegate Julie Plakovich-Carr here to present House Bill 237. This is a bipartisan bill that I've been very proud to have worked on with Delegate Griffith for the last several years. So this bill would ensure that the appointment process used to fill vacancies in the General Assembly is transparent and inclusive of the public. Notably, our committee and the full House passed an identical version of this bill last year. So for a reminder for folks who may not remember the bill or who are new to the committee, just first want to say up front that this bill is not about any particular appointment. Every member of this body makes valuable contributions regardless of how they first arrived here. So as you know, all vacancies in the Maryland General Assembly are currently filled by appointment by the governor with input by the local central committee. And in Maryland, we've had a very high number of vacancies. In just the past 10 years, there have been 65 legislative appointments made. And that means that Maryland actually ranks second overall across all of the states in terms of the total number of legislative appointments and vacancies we've had. And of course, this bill isn't being considered in a vacuum. We continue to have discussions each session about potentially having special elections to fill at least some legislative vacancies. But it is worth noting that the bill that the Senate has repeatedly sent over to us on that front would still result in appointments some of the time. So I still continue to believe that this bill is needed regardless of what we do on special elections. So HB 237 would ensure a transparent appointment process by both major political parties. It follows the best practices established in other states' laws, and some of the provisions of the bill are already included in one or both major political parties' central committee's bylaws. So collectively, the reforms in the bill will boost public trust in the appointment process and ensure that all central committees across the state follow the same minimum standards. Thank you for your consideration.
Okay, any questions? Okay, seeing none, thank you very much. That concludes the hearing on House Bill 237. House Bill 153, Delegate Fair.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair, Chair Atterbury, Vice Chair Wilkins, and esteemed members of the Ways and Means Committee. For the record, Delegate Chris Fair, presenting House Bill 153. This is an uncomplicated bill that seeks to streamline an overly complicated system, seeks to lower the age of voter pre-registration from 16 years to 15 years and 9 months, and then to inform the future voter when they'll be allowed to vote. When young people go to get their driver's license at 16, they currently can pre-register to vote at the same time. However, if that future driver gets their learner's permit at 15 years and 9 months, the earliest time they are able to do so, they do not have that opportunity to pre-register, creating a confusing two-tier system where some potential voters slip through the cracks, arbitrarily penalizing those youth who are proactive and get their learner's permit as soon as they're able. In short, the current system limiting pre-registration only to those 16 years and older leaves a gap between when teenagers can apply for their learner's permit and when they can pre-register to vote. A missed opportunity to tie voter registration to another significant milestone in young folks' lives and foster greater excitement about our democratic participation. The bill also requires notification to be sent to eligible voters, reminding them when they can begin voting, as well as where they vote and how to vote. Transparent information about the process leads to greater participation and demonstrates to voters that their government wants to hear from them and that their voices matter. I urge you to support House Bill 153, which continues Maryland's efforts to empower future generations of voters, and I respectfully request a favorable report.
Thank you. Any questions? Delegate Wu.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Delegate Fair. I like your haircut. I didn't know that.
I have to try to keep up with the attractiveness of this committee, and it is tough.
Quick question. I noticed we're trying to get a student registered earlier, but they couldn't vote. Do we actually have some studies that if they register the same year they can vote, actually their voting rate is higher than they register vote like 2 years early? They forget. And
There is research actually that shows that the earlier you connect a future voter to the concept of voting, the more likely they are to begin voting at the earliest possible age, and the more consistently at an early age that they begin voting, the more likely they will to become a lifetime voter.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any further questions? Okay, seeing none, thank you very much. That concludes the hearing on House Bill 153. For our final bill, House Bill 6, Delegate Fair. And you have a favorable and a favorable with amendment.
They're all welcome to come up.
Okay,
if
Mr.
Kevin-
Canale, would you like to come up too?
Yep.
Kevin, do you want to come up too?
All right. Chair Atterbury, Vice Chair Wilkins, and esteemed members of the Ways and Means Committee. I am Delegate Chris Fair, presenting House Bill 6. I wanted it to be House Bill 1, but somebody else on this committee stole that bill. Public policy around technology use by government is always filled with vigorous debate. As Delegate Young can tell you, the core of which focuses on balancing the positive impacts of technology with the potential harms from abuse of that technology. HB 6 highlights a way that as a legislature we can empower SSTAT to use relatively common and inexpensive technology to conduct its business more efficiently, bring greater parity between real property owners in Maryland, increase state and local revenues through better assessment accuracy, and ensure that we are effectively and fairly following our state constitution. As required by the Maryland State Constitution, each property in Maryland must be assessed every 3 years. Considering that there are over 2 million unique properties in Maryland, this requirement creates great strain on the dwindling resources and staff at SSTAT. With a constant trickle of new properties to assess, lengthy appeals processes, new legislative directives, and a significant decrease in staff, these combined challenges have quickly become unmanageable for the department. As the department will tell you, it needs additional tools to carry out its mission with more efficiency and accuracy. Responsive to these challenges, HB 6 expands on a program that already exists in 9 counties. It allows SSTAT to harness common technology, called Geographic Information System Visualizations, otherwise known as GIS, overlaid on aerial photography in its assessment process for all jurisdictions. This guarantees that each property gets a current, fair, and balanced assessment within the constitutionally mandated timeline, all without burdening homeowners privacy and property rights with an assessor showing up on their property and saving the department money and staff time. The use of what's called oblique aerial photography, an example of which can be found in the written testimony that will be in your inbox after this hearing today, allows assessors to quickly and accurately measure a building's footprint without having to be physically on site. Simply implementing this technique increases the total statewide assessable real property base by up to $1.25 billion, leading to $1.4 million in increased revenue at the state and $15 million in increased revenue to local jurisdictions. These gains reflect how using technology to increase efficiency can yield significant benefits for the state, especially in trying fiscal times. Last year, the bill passed the House and failed to pass in the Senate over well-intentioned but unfounded privacy concerns related to drone photography. So it is important to mention that these photographs are taken by low-flying airplanes at high altitudes for assessment purposes only. Homeowners do not have to worry about their privacy being invaded or security compromised because the photos cannot depict details inside a building. Privacy is actually enhanced by ensuring that a property assessor does not have to show up on site to your home once every 3 years. Additionally, the storage provision of the bill will help create and maintain an invaluable resource for both SSTAT and our residents. In real time, SSTAT will be able to provide guidance and imagery related to their current assessment process for a given property and be able to be more transparently have more transparent communication for their reasoning behind the assessment value with a given resident. I urge the Ways and Means Committee to give our employees at SSTAT the tools that they need to do their work and use technology to benefit for all of us. Please give HB 6 a favorable report. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the committee. For the record, my name is Dan Phillips, Director of the Department of Assessments and Taxation. House Bill 6 would allow the department to acquire state-of-the-art oblique aerial photographic imagery to generate more accurate real property assessments. Emerging technologies have provided the department with opportunities to continue to do more with less while delivering world-class services for the people of Maryland. Oblique aerial photography uses top-angle images taken by airplane to take accurate measurements of properties without the need for assessors to physically inspect that property. In a study conducted by the department, it was found that the use of this technology would uncover an additional $1.25 billion in additional accessible base that had not previously been identified by state or local authorities. Use of this technology would generate more than $14 million annually in additional revenue for counties across the state. Oblique aerial technology can, on average, perform work in 1 hour that would normally take an assessor 3 hours to complete. The time savings would free up assessors to focus on more complicated assessments, assessment appeals, and portions of the state that are more densely populated with properties and have a higher need for personal attention than others. Furthermore, this technology would allow for more equitable property tax assessment process by uniformly applying aerial photographic procedures across jurisdictions and across properties. Currently, this is being utilized in nine jurisdictions in cooperation with the county governments there. We'd like to expand this statewide. House Bill 6 strengthens the department's efforts to modernize and find more efficient methods of conducting assessments and delivering accurate information to county partners. The department respectfully requests a favorable report. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the committee. Kevin Canale here in support of the bill with an amendment. So I'll agree with the bill sponsor and the fellow panelists. This certainly is a great technology, and it certainly would help with fair assessments across the board. It would make sure that they are accurate and that they are centralized and that everybody is following the same rules. All properties are assessed correctly, and it certainly would increase the tax base. As you heard this morning during your budget briefing, there is a proposal to shift 90% of SSTAT's cost onto county governments. So we respectfully ask that you maintain the 50-50 split in this bill. We don't want any kind of camel's nose under the tent. We think that's the right policy, and not even just for a fiscal reason. We think it's the right policy to have assessments conducted by the state, an impartial party, and not by the county governments themselves. To have 24 different assessment functions across the state and appeals processes just doesn't make sense. It's bad policy. So for that reason, we like the bill. We think this is a great step forward, but we would just ask you to take a look at the fiscal note and please to maintain the 50-50 split between SDAT and the counties for this and all other functions. So with that, we'd ask for a favorable report with an amendment.
Okay, first question, Delegate Hornberger.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I'm just looking at the fiscal note here. I have to assume that there's a cost to this, what we'll just call surveillance, right, that's associated with it. And my concern is that this is already being duplicated both by federal agencies and private sector companies, such as Google, for example. So why aren't we utilizing that, what I'll call free service, rather than duplicating that at the local level or the state level for something that already exists and is universally accepted?
Many of the free sources, we utilize some Google products to look at things. Almost all of our computers have Google Earth on them. They also, we will look at Google Street View to look at properties at times. The biggest issue is they don't have accurate measuring tools. With the technology that's available from oblique imagery, you can measure buildings, using the side-to-side measurements. I've done it utilizing that compared to buildings I personally have measured myself, and it's accurate to within a half a foot to 6 inches. That ability to measure buildings accurately is what separates it from the free sources that are available.
But my understanding is that NASA also does, from a satellite, maps the Earth as well. It sounds like you're paying for a tool, not necessarily the mapping. So in other words, that company that you just described is taking mapping that's already taken place, and then they're attaching some sort of digital widget to that, and you're paying for that service.
They are actually taking an airplane with high-resolution cameras, and they are flying across the grid pattern of the state to take imageries. They typically do this in the winter when all the leaves are off the trees, so that they are then able to use that. And there are several companies. It's not one company. There are several companies that offer these services. So this is not company-specific, but they do offer the technology for us to be able to accurately measure that. When you look at things like Google Earth, you can get top-down views, but say measuring a house, you have to guess then about how wide's the eave? Is the eave of the house right at the side? Does it have a 2-foot eave across it? And that can distort the measurements that you have, whereas the oblique imagery allows you to measure wall to wall.
And from a accuracy standpoint, is the juice worth the squeeze? So if you're using a tool that's somewhat less accurate, not as accurate, is you being able to get within a 1-foot measurement versus a 2-foot measurement justify the cost of that vendor for something that you could do with off-the-shelf, a free product?
Well, I'm going to say if you got something that you're off 2 feet on each end, a 4-foot variance versus a 6-inch variance, if you're the property owner, wouldn't you rather have it more accurate?
Well, I mean, all of this comes down to the most accurate thing is the historic method that you use, which is
absolutely it is. Yes.
Okay. All right. I just, it's not real clear in this fiscal note what the cost is. Do you have they given you a RFI or an RFP that says this is a $5 million service or a $100 million service?
We have not had an actual RFP put on the streets. I think the bill indicates that the counties, the initial bill was that they would fund the first $1 million of the cost of this, and then above that it would be split.
Okay.
So we're anticipating that it's going to be probably $1 million a year or so.
Right. So the other concern there is, a county like Kent County, for example, that's a significant hit for only a small increase in revenue. In other words, they might have to pay more for that vendor to provide that service than they would gain from the higher assessment. So I'm just concerned about the ambiguities of the fiscal note, but look forward to getting some more information from the bill sponsor. Thank you.
And Delegate, I'll just share on page 5. There's an initial breakdown of how that $1 million will be separated. Kent County would be expected to chip in, as it's proportional to the size, would be expected to chip in $5,628 a year in order to make that software work. And one final note, the software, in addition to its ability to use angled photography from multiple angles to be able to accurately measure a property, the software, I believe, also then stores that imagery so that it's quickly accessible to SSTAT in the cases where an individual wants to appeal their property or inquire. They are able to then quickly pull up that property information and share how they determine the size and scope of their property.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Delegate Long.
Sorry.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question is, are you talking about new construction?
We're talking about everything. As we look at properties, the reality is that while many people get building permits if they're doing an addition to their house, many people do not. And in some areas, buildings are allowed to be built without any building permits at all. If we have a building permit, we would typically go out and look at the property. But this is for reviewing property rather than having somebody going out and truly driving down the street. They would go to that street and they would look at this aerial imagery to verify, has anything been added to the property? Are there any changes? And then in certain cases, we actually do use it if we have properties that we can't easily access. We would use it to actually measure the buildings on the property. It's not unusual in rural areas to have longer gated lanes that we can't get back to look at the property. That's where we would typically use this to actually measure the buildings rather than viewing them in person.
Getting back to unpermitted property, wouldn't it be up to the local jurisdiction to enforce that?
Oh, it is, but SSTAT has no authority to enforce it. So, I mean, but that's up to the local jurisdiction to enforce it. But there are policies in place that jurisdictions may not require permits for every type of improvement.
Well, I like to know where that's at, because where I live, you can't even sneeze without a permit. I'm being honest. You know, I built houses for years, and you guys showed up. As soon as the foundation was in, you were out there with your roller measuring it. I'm like, I got a half a year tax bill.
It's rare for single-family homes to not, or a townhouse not to have a permit. But there are things that in some counties they have properties that if the property is over a certain size, they don't need to have a building permit.
Really?
Yes.
That's new to me. I'm going to have to move to that county. Real quick, you know, where I'm from, I would think most of the properties have already been measured.
Right, and most of them have.
Okay. And I just don't see the need of this, and I'm being frank with you. And the other thing is, have you thought about the legality of this? Because people do have air rights. So if you start flying over top of my house taking pictures, it could be challenged. Because you know you own from the center of the earth to infinity. You know that, right?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So Delegate, in Baltimore County, this technology is actually currently utilized.
Yeah, but is it used to enforce anything?
Is it used to well,
yeah.
You're talking in terms of the air rights?
Right. Well, no, I'm talking about, I know Baltimore County does it.
Right.
Because I've actually seen my house. The question I have is, I don't think Baltimore County actually uses that to enforce property taxes.
So we are actually able to use the software in counties where it's currently being used. We can piggyback off of that software to assist with our assessments. Baltimore County, and this is just what I remember from my time there, tends to use it for their GIS services,
Yes.
heat maps, that sort of thing.
Well, I don't think it's ever been challenged, but you do have property rights, and I'm just thinking about privacy issues. People, I'm just telling you how people in my district feel.
And certainly, we're not using drones. Anything that's flying is going to be at acceptable FAA regulation levels, flight levels. So we're talking 1,000, 1,500, 2,000-foot flight levels above the property in FAA airspace. So they're not going to be using a drone real close. We've looked at imageries, you know, you might be able to see that a person was walking down the street, but you cannot identify anybody from that. But it is not something that's flown that low level that it's intruding on the space. Most people, if the plane's flying over, aren't going to even notice that it's flown.
Right. All right, thank you. I was just curious if you ever had anyone challenge that using that information.
Delegate Hartman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So offline, you'll have to fill us in on the counties and size of the properties where you could build without a building permit. That sounds pretty appealing. But the question, the bill, in the original language of the bill, it includes different aids that you presently use, records of new construction, sales, building cost, and private appraisals. And then it's adding this other language. Private appraisals, how much weight is put in those when they're presented in an appeal or whatever the case may be? What's the policy when a private appeal is brought into, you know, to be used as a tool or an aid?
Right. The policy on that is if a property owner submits an appeal that's been done by a licensed appraiser, that we look at it and we evaluate the data just the same as any other data we look at. It's given full weight based on the data that's included in that. The vast majority of them are quite good. I will say that sometimes they're not particularly good. But that's something we have to kind of look at it and see, are the properties that are included, are they truly comparable to the subject property? The same as we would when we're looking at sales data that we have.
So it's all discretionary. There's no guarantee that.
There is a certain amount of discretion. I will tell you, I had an example in the county that I worked in where, unlike normal circumstances, the comparables that were picked were not only not in the county, they were on the other side of the bay. And for me to look at that and say that appraisal is really good and should take precedence over properties that are sold near the subject, I wouldn't do that because it's not accurate. But we have to look at that actual data and see what's included.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, seeing no further questions, that concludes the hearing. I have an announcement, so do not jump up and leave. You all can leave. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
That concludes House Bill 6, and it also concludes the Ways and Means bill hearings for today. Just take a 30-second pause.